Hi, welcome to Birthing at Home, a podcast. I'm Elsie, your host. I'm a home birth mum of 2 little boys. I'm a mental health nurse, a home birth advocate broadly, but also more specifically in the state of Victoria, and I'm an ex-student midwife. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people who are the traditional custodians of the land I'm recording on in Melbourne, Australia. I would also like to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have been birthing at home on country for tens of thousands of years prior to the British invasion, and acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. Risk women in pregnancy and birth. Our conversation today will make you think, reflect, and give you a glimpse inside Kristine's work as a midwife and how she works between such contrasting birth cultures whilst respecting the power of physiological birth. Welcome, Kristine, to Birthing at Home, a podcast.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Can you remind me where you're joining from?
Yes, I am in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan here in the U.S. And it's very, very close to Canada. Now, it's super cold up here, so very far north.
Yeah, amazing. I'm so excited to share with the listeners today a little insight into your life as a midwife with Doctors Without Borders. I was just listening to your episode that was almost exactly 2 years ago released on the Birthing Instincts podcast. So it's quite fitting, I think, that we're talking now.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, I remember doing that. I was in South Sudan, right? That was the one?
Yeah. So I guess, do you want to give a bit of background about, who you are, Kristine?
Sure. So I am a certified professional midwife. That's a designation that we have in the U.S. But I started out in birth about 35 years ago. And I was a traditional midwife for about 17 years, meaning that I didn't have any kind of licensure or registry or certification. And I also was practicing illegally. So it's really important that I explain that when I'm talking to people, when I'm out teaching or whatever, because I have such a wide spectrum of people that either come and learn when I'm teaching a breech, which I'll get into in a minute, or really just anything, because there are a lot of birth keepers, doulas, people that want unassisted birth, all of that. There's a whole spectrum. So I don't want to be pigeonholed into, she's a CPM, she's certified, she's like this big rule follower. I never felt more free practicing midwifery community-based than I did when I was practicing illegally, honestly. And I had my baby. I only have one. He's 24 now, but I had him alone at home. So, just in case the subject of free birth or unassisted birth comes up, I'm not against any of these things. Having your baby at home unassisted, having your baby with, somebody who's not certified, none of those things. I really believe in autonomy, and I think people should be well educated and know what their options are, but then also, know what that means, what it means to birth by yourself, or what it means to birth with somebody who doesn't have certification, and how that differs, and what it means to birth with somebody who does have certification also.
Absolutely.
So I've worked as a community midwife for many years, and I like I said, I became certified. I have always done breeches and twins from the beginning because I did my apprenticeship in an Amish community with a midwife there, and the Amish, they do everything at home. So breech and twins were never anything that was shied away from, or anything that I learned to fear. So I've been doing them all along. And now I work for Doctors Without Borders, as you mentioned, MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, and I go to I do humanitarian aid. That's what we do with MSF. And so I go to remote areas of the globe, to refugee camps and conflict zones, disaster areas. And I provide humanitarian aid in sexual and reproductive health. And so that includes not just maternity care, but also contraceptive care, safe abortion care, and The big one is SGVB, sexual and gender-based violence, which is a huge part of the SRH package in MSF, because there is a lot of sexual violence in the places where we go. And so that's a big part of what the midwives do. And most of the time I go places where there are no obstetricians. I am the one making the decisions. I work with national staff and I'm the, team lead. And so the responsibility is on me to make the decisions. And we oftentimes don't have access to cesarean. And so all of that to say that I've seen an enormous variety of complications and things that I've had to figure out how to manage without sending somebody to a C-section, and hopefully getting a good outcome in the end also.
Yeah, of course. Wow, that's so incredible. I guess what I often ask the people that I interview is, how do you remember, like, when you learnt about birth or even birthing at home? Because in Australia, commonly, women only find out about, especially men, partners, only find out like after they're, pregnant, or more often is when they've had a traumatic experience in a hospital setting and then they discover home birth. It's like they haven't even heard of it before. So do you remember when you heard of it?
Yeah, actually, I do. So I'm the oldest of 9, and my mom did not have any of us at home. She was somewhat high risk, now that I know about birth. I was the first, though. So my mom was eternally pregnant while I was growing up. And so I always kind of she made it look easy. She made it seem normal. Yes, she went to the hospital to have her babies, but it was like, it was just no big thing. And so that's really where I learned about pregnancy and birth being normal. She miscarried twins at home at about 11 or 12 weeks. I remember that very vividly. I was in maybe 5th or 6th grade. And so when I went to paramedic school out of high school, and I had to write a report on something, and I don't remember how it came up, but the topic of midwifery came up, and I decided to interview a home birth midwife in my hometown where I was living. And that's when I got introduced to home birth midwifery, but I wouldn't see a home birth for several years. But I was still very much captivated by it, and was I remember being attracted to birth then, even though I didn't go into the birth field for a while. Yeah. So that was probably the first time I think I learned about home birth.
Wow. And so did you go into tradition? So from what I understand, having listened to the Birthing Instincts podcast, is that there are some states in the United States that just don't license midwives. So that's when like traditional midwifery comes into play. Is that sort of correct?
Yes. There are states where it's legal, and then that means you have to be a CPM. If you're a CPM, a direct entry midwife, you have to be then licensed through the state. First you're a CPM, and then they license you, or it's a registry. So it's either registered midwife or licensed midwife, depending on the state. But then there are states where it's illegal or not regulated. And so like, I think Kansas is one of those states. Here in Michigan, it used to be that way up until I think they got the licensure in 2019, if I'm not mistaken. Wow. I didn't live here then. So, but it was illegal for a long, long time. It's different depending on where you live and what state you're in. There's different rules and regulations. So in some states, you can't do VBACs, twins, breech, anything. You can just literally, it's got to be somebody who falls in these very narrow parameters, like Louisiana is one of those states. And I think Colorado is not a very friendly state either. So yes. But Michigan and Wisconsin, where I happen to be licensed, but I don't practice here because I work abroad. But I'm licensed because I live right in between these two states, and I have friends who work, and sometimes I can help them, and it helps if I'm licensed. But it's we can do twins, breech, and VBAC. It's not a problem at all,
Wow.
and so it's more liberal in some of the states than others.
Yeah. Here in Australia, like broadly speaking, there are private midwives that will support VBACs within reason. But yeah, twins or multiples, I don't actually think it's like illegal, but there's a lot of toxicity between like the maternity medicalized hospital system and private rogue midwives, and who report them to our registry body called APRA, the Australian Health Professional Registration Association or whatever. And also to child protection. So there's still a lot of that toxicity in Australia. And like I was saying before, less than 1% of women give birth at home. And that's, partly because it's just not, midwives aren't allowed to support much variation, I guess.
Yeah.
But I am so interested to hear about, your experiences with Doctors Without Borders. So many people's response to home birth is, women die, and often lower resourced countries are cited as evidence of, see, women die, and babies die, so that's why we should be birthing in the hospital. But I find it so fascinating that you work in this very high risk, low resource situation, but you still are able to appreciate and respect and support physiological birth, in categories that some people do consider very high risk. So I wonder, how do you ever have any conflict in your mind about that?
Well, that's an interesting question. No, I really don't have conflict. I will say that, starting out in midwifery, just never having seen a birth. The first birth I ever saw was at home. It was not in a hospital. And I was learned that birth was normal and natural and, part of nature. And the less you mess with it, the more likely it is that you will have a good outcome. And the more we meddle in things and disturb it, then the more we then have to intervene, and the worse the outcomes can be. And I learned this coming up through midwifery, and this is how I was taught by the senior midwives that I worked with, and it was just the belief that I espoused. So I always have thought less is more, and the less you do, the better it is. And, if something happens, then of course, you're there, and then that's when you intervene. That's when you might need to do a vaginal exam or, give medication, whatever it might be. And so, then fast forward all these years, later, and I'm working with literally the highest risk mothers and babies in the world. And I have seen some just incredible things in the field, and I've managed some really incredible situations. And what I have learned from that is that birth is a normal and natural physiological process, and the less you intervene in it, the better it is, unless or until you need to. Even with the highest risk mothers and babies in the world, birth tends to work. It doesn't mean we don't have to tweak some things along the way, but I have seen what other people would say, oh, well, that's impossible. Well, that can't happen. You can't do that. This is that baby wouldn't survive. That mother can't do that. I have witnessed it. I have managed situations with my own hands and my own skills with the most limited things, and it can still work. And so just one small example would be, a very low-lying placenta, like a partial previa. So you go in, somebody's in labor, you do a vaginal exam, you feel the placenta at 7:00. It's not covering the os, but you feel it. It's there. What are you going to do? You don't section that person in the field because, and they're in labor, they're losing some blood. And what my job is to monitor. First, I take a hemoglobin level on them, and then I find out where we are. I make sure we have some blood products available in case. When I was in South Sudan, we did have a general surgeon. We don't have an OB, but I would alert the surgeon that I might have somebody that needs to go to OT, and they need to be ready in case if she starts to bleed too much. Okay. Yeah. And so then what happens usually is the cervix starts to dilate, the baby's moving down, and the head tends to tamponade any bleeding and move past that placenta, and the baby is born. And I've never once had a low-lying placenta that I've had to send somebody to section for. We've had some pretty nice blood loss with it, but nothing that we couldn't manage, and nothing that, that we weren't taking unnecessary risks. So, anyway, so I just feel like it's, one of those, things where, obviously you're not going to take that risk here in the United States. You have a perfectly good operating room, and we have very good, we don't have to parse out the cesareans, but I'm just saying I've seen things that should not be possible actually happen. So
absolutely. I also interviewed a man that lives in Texas, and he's actually from Guatemala, and he was talking about that also in lower resource countries, like the thought of going to hospital to pay to use resources to have a baby is just like, that just doesn't happen. Like, I think in Guatemala, I was reading some rough stats, and like 50% of women technically are birthing at home. But it's not, I guess, out of choice in the same way that in countries like the States or Australia it is. Some women are, don't really have a choice because it does cost money, and it does cost resources to be in a hospital, and that is a privilege. But that also doesn't mean that we have to, at the sight of every red flag, utilize the full extent, the full toolbox of like what we can, just because it's there, of course.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so you said that you've always, never shied away from supporting women birth twins, and even like I think so. When you were on the Birthing Instincts podcast almost 2 years ago, you said that you had delivered about 9 sets of triplets at home, and now I suspect that's a couple more. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's a total of about 9. Maybe it was at 9 or was it 7 back then? Because I know I've done 2 here in the U.S. In the last year. One last week and one about 10 months ago. So I think I can't ever remember exactly. I think it's around 9. It could be 10.
That's still so amazing.
The only ones I've ever done in the U.S. were these 2. All of the rest have been out of the U.S. So.
Yeah.
Because it's very rare for somebody here to, as I'm sure it is in your country, to opt to have vaginal triplets at home. And also it can be difficult even to get to term with them. And I really require somebody to be 36 weeks if I'm going to help them at home here in the U.S. And both of the mamas I've helped have made it to well beyond 36 weeks. So I had no problem helping them. But that's not usually the case. So
and I think you said that you also work with Breech Without Borders. Is it called Breech Without Borders?
Yes. They're a nonprofit, and they teach breech skills. We have an online portion of of the course, and then people can sign up and do simulations. I was in at the end of December 2023, I was in Sydney and Tasmania teaching the simulation workshops. So providers could come and practice breech maneuvers on the simulations. Dr. Bissett's was there in Sydney teaching with me. I love him.
Wow.
And so it's really wonderful. I love teaching breech, and I've attended hundreds of breech births, so they're just really a passion of mine.
Wow.
And I just think that they're again, it's nothing to be feared, but it is something that you really have to know about. I think if you're not skilled in breech, then it is something that you do need to learn if you're going to be attending women in birth. So because it's not difficult to learn, but you have to learn what's normal before you know how to be able to notice if something is not normal with breech. And that's where the problems come in, is like not knowing it, what to do and when.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that, twins is quite special at home, but triplets, like we've said, is almost unheard of in recent history in more resourced countries. But the first time you supported a woman to give birth to triplets, that was overseas somewhere?
Yes. Probably about 20 years ago, at least.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And, do you remember what, some basic things about, what that was like, because it's a whole extra baby that you have to be considering about. So it's like, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I would say that we always have to be prepared for baby with triplets, with baby C being kind of a wild card. You just never know what's gonna happen with that baby, and you have to be prepared to go in after it if you need to, and you have to be prepared for a lot of blood and figuring out ways to mitigate that. So, just assume you're going to have a lot of bleeding. And honestly, as hands off as I am, if somebody's given birth to 3 babies, they usually handle the first 2 quite well. By the time they have the third one, that's a lot on their body. And then to lose blood, or, of course they're going to lose some blood, but to have to lose extra blood, I am all about, let's not see if she hemorrhages, because I can pretty much guarantee she probably will.
Yeah.
And so why not have a managed third stage? Normally, I don't do that. In the field, I absolutely do, because we're required to, because those women do bleed, and they come in with very low hemoglobins to start out with, even with singletons, for various reasons. So, but here, I would say, in the U.S., that it is not, I think it is not at all a foolish thing to do a managed third stage. And I normally would not do that. And so, I think that you have somebody that is going to need to take care of and feed 3 babies from her body.
Yeah.
If you can do something to help her not feel really awful afterwards, then why not? When we can almost bet on the fact that she's going to lose a fair amount of blood, why not try to minimize that? So that's what I would say is the kind of the biggest thing.
Yeah. Is the third baby sort of a wild card, because there's now, so much more space, do you think?
Yeah. Part of it's that, and part of it is oftentimes those babies are on an oblique, or oblique is actually better than transverse, but they'll be transverse, and that's fine. And they usually will go down to a breech or vertex, whatever, they're going to go one way or another. But oftentimes if they're slow at doing it, then, then that's when they may need a little bit of guidance getting down there. So, the birth I had last year, the babies were cephalic breech, and they all came out just fine. And the biggest space was between babies A and B, and then B and C, there was only like 7 to 10 minutes, something like that. So, it was rather easy, and they were born in the water, all three of them.
Wow.
And then, and then this most recent one, I did do an extraction for baby C. So, but I wasn't surprised.
See that on your amazing Instagram this morning, actually. Yeah. That's so fascinating. And forgive my ignorance, but what is, especially in triplets, the placenta, when are the placentas born? Is it, a baby A's comes or baby B's come? How does that work?
Yeah, no, with multiples, all the placentas usually come with whether it's twins or triplets, after all of the babies are out. And it is problematic if they, every once in a while, if you have a set of die twins, a baby will come out and that placenta will come out, that one for that baby, because they're separate. But oftentimes they're sort of fused together, or they kind of grow together. And so they usually will come out after the fact, because we don't want all that bleeding in between. But that's always a risk, and it can always happen. And I think baby C's the placenta started to detach before baby C was ready to make his way down. He was making his way down to the pelvis, but he wasn't quite in it yet. And so he just needed a little bit of help because he broke his water bag, and then there was blood along with the amniotic fluid. And I'm like, well, this is time to do this, because his heart rate also went down to 70. And so I'm like, oh, let's just go in and get him. And the mama knew. I told her, I might have to, because he's transverse and I don't know how quickly he's going to come or how easily he's going to cooperate with us to turn. I may need to go up and get him. So I got informed consent from her beforehand. So she understood, so that when I actually needed to do it, I said, okay, I need to do what I said I was going to maybe need to do. And she's like, okay. So then there's no time to answer those questions, and it's far less traumatic for them if they understand, oh yeah, this has been explained to me. I get it. And she knew, she prepared herself mentally, she said, and she did. And it's, it's something that you do together with the mother. It's not something you do to her or with the baby. It's like you're working together. So I needed her cooperation to push, and we did it together. So
amazing. And, in terms of duration of, from the start of labor to, until baby C is born, is there, in terms of labor duration, is it similar to, singleton labors, or is it longer? Is it shorter? Is there sort of a rhyme or reason to it?
Yeah, it sort of depends on the person's previous history. If they're a primip, that's going to be a different situation, because we don't know. We don't have any. We can assume that she's going to have a primip labor. I know somebody who's waiting on primip twins right now, so that's what made me think of that. But in the case of, for example, these two triplet moms that I helped, one was a G5, and this one was a G7. So they already had histories of what they did with their births, and they both followed their histories. The one had fairly quick births, especially the last few. So I thought she was going to birth quickly, and she did. And then this one, her last birth was about 8 hours before pushing, and she did just about that. Maybe slightly under, but I think pretty much from when she started contracting, even though it wasn't active labor, to when the first baby that she pushed out, it was about 8. And then it was an hour or a little over an hour between each baby. So So there was a little rest period. So yeah.
Yeah. And I was thinking about this morning before we chatted as well. So it looks like from the pictures there was 3 midwives, you and 2 other midwives?
Yeah, she had a midwife following her. So I traveled for this birth. And she had a midwife following her throughout her pregnancy. And her triplets were triplets. So they had their own amnions, their own chorions. They were all in their own little bags. So literally the most the easiest type of birth to do. It's like twins, like it's just 2 babies and 1 uterus. In this case, it's 3 babies, 1 uterus. Nobody was sharing anything. So they were just siblings. There was no identical anything. Well, once they were born also. So she had her midwife and she was following her throughout the pregnancy. And then I went down at 36 weeks, to sit and wait. And then that midwife had gotten together a team. So she got another experienced midwife, which I required. And then, that midwife had a student who was, fairly advanced because she was also a registered nurse. So she had skills, she had good skills. And I knew that she worked in the ICU. This woman was going to be calm. And this is what I wanted. Somebody that was going to be calm. And then the other 2 students belong. So 3 midwives and 3 students, the other 2 students belonged to the midwife that had been following her throughout her pregnancy. And she said that they were going to be, calm and respectful. And really, they just needed to stay in the corner, do the charting, and then, hand over blankets and, clean up between the babies and, go get water or juice or something for the mama, whatever. We needed those things done. And then afterwards, then that's where all the more of the work was, because then they were they did the newborn exams under supervision because they're getting signed off on their skills. So of course, so then they each get a baby and they get to be signed off on their newborn exam skills and all of that. And so it was very nice. It was really, there is video of all 3 births, and it's really beautiful. And you would never guess there were so many people in the room because it was really quite lovely. And it was a daytime birth, actually. She labored in the night, and then it was a morning birth, but not early morning, like 8, 9, 10 is when the babies came in those hours. So kind of unusual. But it was really quite lovely. And we had just the right amount of people. And everybody worked together really, really quite well. There was not a lot to do, for the most part. And it was the grandma that received babies A and B. A couple of people said, "Oh, I like how you coached that midwife." I said, "Oh, that wasn't a midwife. That was the grandma."
That was grandma. That's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the first baby came in the call, and the membranes released right when the head and shoulders were coming out. And then the second baby was born completely in the call. And then it was breech and then splashed, kind of right into the grandma's hands. So she got to catch the 2 little girls, and I got the baby boy.
Amazing. Wow. And, is the postpartum care, somewhat similar, as it would be for a singleton?
Yeah, it's just kind of postpartum care on steroids. You have to, you do have 3 babies and a mom who just went through a lot. Generally, I like to recommend that for the first few days, at least, a visit every day, and the babies being, closely monitored and weighed, and making sure that nursing is going well, because we know that they're going to be a little bit small to begin with, and we want them to keep up their weight. Right. Yeah. So we want to monitor that rather closely. And then as long as everything's going well, it's okay. With experienced moms like this one was, she had several babies. So, she knows if something's not right, she's on top of it. She knows she needs to stay down. She goes downstairs once a day and then back up, up the stairs. She's not going to go up and down, all of that. It'll just exhaust her. So, but her full-time job is, before her full-time job was gestating, and now her full-time job is breastfeeding. And so far she is getting some donor milk for her freezer for when it might be needed. But right now all of them have had only the colostrum and the breast milk.
Wow.
And so that's the normal course. And that would be the same with twins as well. But depending on how the birth went and if they're experienced parents, we might not need to visit every day the first few days, but certainly day 1, certainly day 3. And I would like day 5 and day 7. So just up it a little bit. And normally we would do days 1, 3, and 7, and then 2 weeks, and then 4 weeks and 6 weeks. Yeah. So, but it will be a little bit more closely monitored just to make sure everybody's doing okay.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many little people to think about.
Yeah, exactly.
I wonder if you can share any words about, obviously you've worked with women and babies across so many different cultures. Like, I guess home birth is often, I guess in my personal experience, like especially for my second home birth, it was somewhat a magical experience. And I really see it as, being like the power behind, or the power for, I feel like it's going to propel me in my life. And I wonder, in countries where, like home birth isn't actually really the option sometimes, like, do women, like, how that initiation into motherhood and, taking on a new life and caring for a new life, like, is it the same, or do you have any words to, give an insight to that?
Yeah. So if I'm working in a refugee camp, yes, it's really difficult for those women because of the cramped quarters and the lack of privacy for them to have their babies at home, even if they were to want to, because they're not really in their home.
Yeah.
They're in, not very great surroundings. However, I will say when I was in Bangladesh and working with the Rohingya population, there were 1 million people in that camp. And, there were a lot of home births, and people could easily get to us. But they chose to stay home with the Rohingya, traditional midwives the traditional birth attendants that they came, when they came as refugees, all the midwives came with them because they were refugees as well. So they're well respected in their communities. And then oftentimes these women, if they had a problem with the birth, they would bring them in, to us. But, so they still would, birth, even though they had access to care, and it is free. It's 100% free, and they are treated respectfully. At least, I can say it, at least when I'm around, they're treated respectfully. It's birth in other cultures is really difficult to explain to people in terms of how it's not this. It's something that you have to do, and it's a very matter-of-fact thing. So it's not like, we have to be all like rubbing backs and saying sweet things. That's not the way it is with these, in these other cultures. But what I do notice is when women do come into like the maternities to birth, they come in with a female relative. Men don't come in with them. It's usually their mother, sister, a co-wife, somebody like that, an auntie, someone. It's usually the closest female relative to them. And so they come in and they have that person with them, and that person's caring for them, bringing food to them, postpartum, all of that. And so it is that sort of expected thing in most of these cultures. And then they, for example, the women give birth they have to bring all their own supplies with them. I mean, obviously we have medications but there's no chucks pads, those disposable underpads, things like that. Yeah. They birth on their skirts, on their fabric, and then their mothers or co-wives or sisters or whatever, they take the birth laundry away, and we have an area where they wash it and hang it out. And so then you see all this beautiful fabric, like blowing in the breeze, all these beautiful African fabrics being washed after the birth, and they wash everything out of them. And then they help them get dressed afterwards, and they care for them. And like I said, bring them food and so forth. And so it is very, very much a community thing. And, they help with breastfeeding, and, help support them in that. And it's just, it's just really how it is. And so, it's, again, it's just something that they see that they have to go through, and that they know that all of their, friends and family do the same thing. But it's not something that's like super, like, oh, we're going to light candles and have fairy lights and, that's foreign to them. And it's actually the staff kind of chuckle at me when I'm like really sweet to the women and talking because the women don't understand me. They're speaking tribal languages. The staff does, because they'll usually speak English or French or whatever the national language is in that country. But the people coming in, because they've been educated, but the people coming in have probably not been educated. And so they have not gone to school, and therefore they have not learned the national language, and they're speaking any one of a number of tribal languages, but I'll talk to them anyway. And because body language and the sound of your voice, it makes a difference. And so I do talk to them, and they're like, you're just so nice to I'm like, well, why wouldn't I? I'm like, you're supposed to be having a baby, but it's so foreign to them to be like, it's their job also as midwife. The midwife job is a job. So then that's seen as, it's not like with us where we're like, oh, it's what an honor to be at your birth, and this beautiful, and I'm going to make this as lovely as possible for you. Yeah. It's just like, no, it's my job. Okay, get up on the table. Yeah. All right, keep pushing. That's how it is. And so it's very different, and it can be very harsh for somebody that's coming from a Western culture to see what it's like with these other cultures, and I rarely, if ever, get to see a home birth, because I'm not called out to homes. I did attend a home birth in Aceh, Sumatra, when I was there back in 2004 after the earthquake and tsunami. And there was they called in a medicine man who came in and said a prayer over the mother's belly and chewed up some I don't know what kind of herb, but some sort of herb. And they chewed it up and then spit it out on the mother's, after he chewed it and on the belly, and then rubbed it all over the belly and was saying in some incantations. It was really quite fascinating. Yeah. But the family was around for that. The females in the family, they were all around this woman having her baby. So I got to this little glimpse of this beautiful, magical world with who would be there with her. If I wasn't there, they would be, alone at home with her, and hopefully her baby would have safe passage, and but I happened to be able to be there, which was lovely, and so I got to see that, and it was really quite an honor. So it's unfortunate that I am not able to see more of that when I'm in the field, but the places I go are dangerous, and I would never get invited. I mean, they don't need some white lady intruding on their birth space, If they need me, they bring somebody in. And it's funny when they bring people in, like in the refugee camp. I would walk into maternity, and as soon as I saw an empty wheelbarrow sitting outside the door, I'm like, uh-oh, we have an emergency. And I'd run in. I'm like, who's in the wheelbarrow? Because if they're in a wheelbarrow, they can, Can you believe it? Can you imagine being in labor and having some problem in labor and having somebody bring you in a wheelbarrow? I know.
Oh my gosh. Oh my goodness. I guess, yeah, I work in youth mental health here in Australia, and there's lots of refugees make up a big portion of, or big part of the demographic in that, you know, suffer from youth mental health issues. You know, from South Sudan and whatnot. But
Right.
you know, it is a privilege. It's a privilege to be able to think about how you feel. And I guess, yeah, when you know, your first concern is, you know, like your basic needs like shelter and food and feeling, you know, safe, then yeah, the magic or the, you know, of, you know, birth, like that's definitely not on your mind because you're like, I need to give birth. It's, you know, I'm in a vulnerable position as it is right now. It's just like so fascinating. But yeah, like I wonder, yeah, like if it wasn't for the joys of colonization and war and, you know, all of these things, like how would it be? Because yeah, now it is the norm, of course, but yeah, like lots of food for thought.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's really quite complicated when you look at when I go to these different places, all I can do is see the damage that colonization has done, and I try to like back up and just be as, you know, unassuming and inobtrusive as possible and do my job and just kind of like apologize for being a white person who is, you know, in a long line of white people who have done a lot of damage, especially on the African continent. And I just, you know, MSF does not, they're very aware of that sort of perception. And that's why the majority of the staff is national staff. And I just go to help support the national staff. And unfortunately, I happen to be white. And so it really is a detriment. It's interesting when, you know, there's a lot of talk about white privilege. And I will tell you, it is not a privilege to have white skin working in an African country. There's nothing privileged about it. And believe me, they let you know very quickly if you were to behave in such a way that, you know, it's so, you know, I just say it right away. I'm like, I'm sorry. I'm another old white lady coming in here telling you what to do. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to support you. You tell me what you need and I'm here to support you. So it's the only thing that I can do. And then I learn about the culture. I learn about what are their birthing practices like? If we weren't here in this maternity, what was birth like for you? And I talk to the grandmas. I talk to the oldest lady I can find and I have them tell me stories. Yeah. And I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. So much to learn and so fascinating, like your experience, because I believe you're usually like the only midwife like attending the births. Is that correct?
Yes. The only expat attending. And then there will be national staff that I'm there to supervise. And so, and I do capacity building with them, but I'm always required to be there for anything that's considered, you know, higher risk. If they have preeclampsia, if they're being induced, they have breech, they have multiples, you know, just anything that's out of the norm. And there's a lot of that. So then I'm required to be there for all of those things. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess, you know, do you have any words on, obviously there's lots and lots of factors, but like any words on, you know, why some of these women are so high risk?
Yeah. So, you know, a lot of it's comorbidities. There's the nutritional component. A lot of them have hemoglobin. They come in with a hemoglobin of 8 to start labor. If somebody walks in and their hemoglobin is like 9 or 10, we're like, yes, excellent. We're excited. we're excited. Here in my country, we risk somebody out of a home birth if their hemoglobin's not above 10.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, because it's like, it's like, we're terrified. So, I mean, there's a lot of malaria. There's a lot of other underlying issues. Malaria is a big one, though. A lot of women miscarry in the early 20-something weeks, you know, around 21, 22 weeks. It's undoubtedly, they walk through the door, they say, oh, I'm having contractions. I had bloody show, 21, 22 weeks. We do a urine dipstick. They have a UTI. We check them for everything, but we do a rapid malaria test and they have malaria. So malaria along with a UTI is a death sentence for a baby at about 21 or 22 weeks. We listen to fetal heart tones. Great. Fetal heart tones are fine. They just put them into premature labor. And I saw this time and again. And so these things happen. And so a lot of it, it's the environment, and they have stressful lives. A lot of them have many children. So then as soon as you get to the grand multip status, you know, then we're talking postpartum hemorrhage.
Yeah.
And so there's just a lot of these factors that are, you know, all of these different risk factors, and lack of prenatal care, lack of access to care. Coming in too late, like they're too far away. And then if I'm not in a refugee camp and I'm in a village somewhere where people have to come to us, then they have to travel, and they might have to travel quite a distance. Yeah. And sometimes it's on foot. Sometimes it's on the back of a motorcycle. Can you imagine?
Yeah. When I spoke to the man originally from Guatemala, that's exactly what he said. You know, women sometimes have to walk for hours. Like I cannot imagine being in labor and having, wow. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. So many incredible and eye-opening and I imagine life-changing experiences that you've had. Like, whoa, wow. How has, you know, has this work that you do, you know, both like such contrasting work, has it changed like how you live your life or how you think about your own life?
100%. Absolutely. Yeah. The immense gratitude I have on a daily basis, particularly when I'm home, because my home is comfortable. It's a nice little home. It's nothing fancy, but I swear I get into my bed at night and it's so comfortable. And I get in and I'm like, oh my God, this bed is so comfortable. I love my bed so much. And because I sleep on these horrible mattresses when I'm away for like 3 or 6 months at a time. And I'm like, oh, but I mean, it's in my back, and I'm 60 years old. So it bothers me now. So it's these little things, and soft toilet paper, like it's just like really seriously the littlest things. And it's daily I have gratitude for these things because I know that, you know, my next assignment, it might not be so cushy, and I'm not going to have these things. And I'm grateful for people, and I see how fragile life is, really. There's loss in some of these bigger projects, like in South Sudan. I deal with death almost every day, whether it's a miscarriage or, you know, or a stillbirth, or a baby that's born too premature, or, you know, a baby with an anomaly. We had 5 maternal deaths when I was there.
Wow.
You know, so it's a lot. And so death is in your face all the time. And so it's what I think about. Like, this could be any day, could be the day. There's tomorrow is not guaranteed to any of us. Mm-hmm. And so I do tend to live my life in a more like, almost like the whole Buddhist way, you know, living in the moment and not worrying so much about tomorrow. I think about it, but I'm just trying to enjoy today, because tomorrow will tend to work itself out somehow, and I'll deal with it when I get there. So it really has changed the way I view things.
Yeah. Wow. I can't even imagine, you know, like obviously, I work with the young people that have grown up and spent many years in such refugee camps, and I just, life is precious. And I guess, you know, some may use that as an argument, you know, against, you know, the risk that you may take in a home birth. But in some cases, like giving birth at home is just as safe, if not safer in some circumstances, than giving birth in a medical setting. And I guess there's still such differences between the countries that you've visited and a country like Australia or even America, where, you know, the cascade of intervention is just part of like the birth culture. Like as soon as you accept one thing, enjoy the ride, because
exactly.
That's just that's not that's also not right. So like lots and lots of things to think about. I am just so grateful for you coming on and chatting with me and sharing some amazing insights into supporting women birth triplets at home. Like that's wow. You know, I see sometimes in comments that people say, "Oh, I didn't know you were allowed. I didn't know your doctor would allow you to." And nobody has to allow you. It's your body.
Know that's what I said to somebody, and then they took me the wrong way, like that I was chastising them, but I was not. I was just saying, no, it's not about being allowed. Women can birth under their own power. Nobody is allowing it. And you don't have to speak to me that way. And it, you know, when you're typing something, you don't hear a person's tone. And I said, oh, I'm sorry you took offense. It's just that language matters. And when we start saying, well, my doctor said that he'll let me labor without without an IV, let you? Oh, how nice of him. Like, who is he to let you do anything? Like, it's just, we have to stop. And so when I saw some allow comments, and I'm like, oh, it's not about allow or disallow. It's about you taking charge of what you want. And if you want to have your try to have your babies vaginally in the hospital with triplets, you can do that. But anyone trying to have a baby in the hospital you're signing up for a more medicalized version of birth. And this is fine if this is what you want, but you have to understand especially the ones that aren't with midwives in hospitals. If they're with obstetrician, you have hired a surgeon to attend your birth. I have been saying this for 35 years. If you hire a surgeon to attend your birth and you're just somebody walking in having a baby, it's overkill. And don't be surprised when you end up getting surgery, because it's what they do. And birth is not a medical event, no matter how much, the medical establishment likes to make us think that it is. It is not. And first and foremost, it is a physiological process that sometimes might need a little bit of intervention. And that's great. The majority of the time, even with the most high risk people, I have seen they can birth just fine, all on their own, without any problems at all. I had a woman have 7 seizures in front of me, walked in labor, 7 seizures. I'm like, we need to get these babies out. Got the seizures under control within a few hours. She birthed her baby. 2 days later, her blood pressure back to normal. She and her baby walked out of there, both just totally fine. How is that possible? How is that possible? But it was possible. So, it's not that I didn't intervene. I did. I gave her, I did the whole magnesium protocol, everything. We threw everything at her and we got her baby out and, she pushed it out but I'm just saying, you can have good outcomes even with the highest risk people. So, and we have to know that.
The concept is like, being a lifeguard, like, you're not going to let people not swim because, they might drown. Like, how many people drown every year? In Australia, a lot of people drown, but you don't say, oh, well, don't get in the water. It's better off if you don't get in the water. Get in the bloody water. And if something happens, let's deal with it,
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, we're very, very risk averse, and we want guarantees. And people think, oh, if I birth in the hospital, I'm safer.
Yeah.
There is no guarantee. I tell my clients that all the time. I cannot guarantee you a good outcome. I'm sorry. Not every pregnancy ends with a live birth. Not every birth ends with a live baby. I cannot guarantee. And neither can any provider on this planet. And one that tells you they can is lying to you because nobody can guarantee it. And so I think that's just what's important to know. And it's just a matter of what kind of responsibility we want to take for our own birth and experiences and so forth. So,
yeah. Well, it's been so amazing to chat to you, Kristine. I was checking out your blog as well. I'll make sure to link that in because that's got also some amazing stories. Do you have any last words or anything that you wanted to share?
No, I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to talk to everyone in Australia, whoever's listening to you. And I know what the birthing culture is like there because I do have friends that are midwives in Australia or who have been, and they tell me, and it's, it's going to be up to the women, the birthing women to continue to stand up for themselves and make the change and demand what they want. And that's the only way we're going to change the culture. And then my part is just standing up for those women, for their autonomy, regardless of what that is. And if that means supporting somebody through something like a triplet birth or multiples when they're told it cannot be done, then I'm going to do that. So, but no, I'm really grateful for the opportunity, and I just appreciate it. And I look forward to coming back to Australia to teach next year, I think, with Breech Without Borders. So.
Amazing. I'll make sure I link Breech Without Borders as well.
Oh, yes, do, because they can look on the schedule. And when we have our 2025 schedule up there, you'll see when we're coming to Australia.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you so much.